series. My name is Skip Rutherford. This beautiful day in Little Rock. Thank you all for coming today. May I ask that you please turn your cell phones and your Blackberries and all electronic devices off. People are getting pretty good about doing that. You now have asked so much that I don't even have to ask anymore. But we got a few. Yeah, good. Mark Nichols teaches a course at the Clinton School called American Global Strategies. Mark's here. And one of his, the texts that he uses is written by our speaker today. To introduce him is Clinton School student Tina Tian. You need to know about Tina. She's a graduate of the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing, China. At the Clinton School, she's working with the Arkansas Department of Human Services on a system of care for children with behavioral health challenges in Washington and Benton counties. This summer, she'll be doing her international public service project with the Clinton Global Initiative in Asia, and she'll be based in Hong Kong. She is an extraordinarily talented individual. We're thrilled to have her at the Clinton School. And let me just give you one bit of information that you might not know about her. Without any help from anyone, a decision on her own, she is among the top leaders in the Clinton School bracketology for the NCAA tournament. Now, I want you to know that there are people who have followed NCAA basketball their entire life that are trailing Tina in the competition. She is, I'm just telling you, she's bright. She can pick basketball out very quick. Ladies and gentlemen, Tina Tian.
Thank you, Dean. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm honored to introduce to you a great American foreign policy specialist. Growing up in China, my first exposure to American foreign policy was learning about Mr. Kissinger's trip to China. President Nixon broke the deadlock between the Western world and the communism China at that time. We appreciate him in taking that risk. And today, you all have seen the greatness of that policy in the world. Many scholars believe there was no effective foreign policy strategy in American history until World War II. But this semester, I was taking an American foreign policy class at Clinton School. One of the primary readings for that class is a special book called Special Providence. That book unveiled me to a new world, a new understanding that American foreign policy has been successful even earlier, back to 19th century. And the author of that book was Mr. Walter Mead. Mr. Mead is an honors graduate from Galton School and Yale, where he received prize for history and debate. He is a Henry Kissinger Senior Fellow for U.S. Foreign Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Mead regularly writes for several journals, magazines, and newspapers, including Foreign Affairs, New Yorker, and Wall Street Journal. He is currently on the staff of Foreign Affairs as a book reviewer and on the editorial board of the American Interest. In 2001, Mr. Mead published Special Providence, American Foreign Policy and How It Changed the World. It won the Lionel Galba Award for the best book in English on international relations in 2002. The Italian translation also won a reward for the most important historical book ever published. In June 2005, Mr. Mead published Power, Terror, Peace, and War, America's Grand Strategy in a World at Risk. The New York Times Book Review called him one of the country's liveliest thinkers about America's role in the world. Today, Mr. Mead is here to talk about his new book, God and Gold, Britain, American, and the Making of the Modern World. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcome one of the greatest American foreign policy thinkers, Mr. Walter Mead.
Well, thanks to everybody thank you for that very kind introduction. Thanks to the school for the invitation to come down here. Thanks to all of you for coming out to hear somebody from North Carolina, even on this day of mourning in the great state of Arkansas. There's always next year. I understand folks in Arkansas are trying to take up a collection to get Tyler Hansbrough such an offer from the NBA that he'll leave school before he graduates. Anyway, I start writing books when there's something going on in the world that I don't understand. And I just try to puzzle my way through to some kind of an understanding of what it is that's happening. When I wrote Special Providence, the questions that I had to answer revolved around two facts that, as far as I could tell, everybody in the world believed, but it was hard for me to see how they could both be true. And the first fact was that from the time of the American Revolution to the present day, virtually everybody in the world who's ever studied American foreign policy or even just casually looked at it has reached the conclusion that Americans are just no good at foreign policy. We are too moralistic, too arrogant, too ignorant. We're either isolationist and trying to ignore the rest of the world, or we're so rapacious, trying to conquer the rest of the world or remake it in our image. We're too idealistic, we're too militaristic. I mean, people disagree on what's wrong with us, but everybody agrees that we're just not as good as, those terrific Europeans who were so sophisticated and wise and experienced. And it's not just anti-Americans who agree on that or foreigners, it's everybody. George Washington thought this. John Adams thought this. Alexis de Tocqueville thought this. It's a long, Dean Acheson thought this. It's a long list. But at the same time you have that consensus, there's another consensus in the world, which is that the biggest trend in international relations for the last 225 years has been the gradual rise in the power and influence of the United States in the international system. So how could the team with the worst skills in the league consistently maintain kind of the highest average in the league? If we're so stupid, what's in second place is another way of asking that question. And actually, it is true that some countries are better than we are at foreign policy. The French remind me of, the best kid in the school in basketball who got all the skills down, got the theory of the game, practices for hours, dribbling, shooting, can do everything, understands the history of the game, has got every move right, but is 5 foot 5 inches tall. And that seems to be a problem. Anyway, so that was what grabbed me in Special Providence. When I started writing God and Gold, I had a different sense of problem here, and that was, it seemed to me that the way people describe the history of the last 400 years, the kind of conventional picture that we carry around in our heads, was just not very satisfactory. Because if you look at it, for the last 400 years, most people will describe this as the rise and fall of Europe in the world, or the rise and fall of the West. That sort of barreling out after the Renaissance and so on. The Europeans establish colonies over the world, dominate everything. And then in the 20th century, a combination of wars in Europe, World War I, World War II, and the rise of developing countries outside of Europe meant an end to this long period of European domination and the beginning of something different. But the more I looked at history, the more I didn't think this was actually what was going on. For one thing, if you look at the role of Europe in the world, after the British defeated the French in 1763 and driving them out of India and North America. From that time on, while European countries from time to time had colonies and empires outside Europe, they all depended on the permission of the British. That is to say, the British Navy, at any moment it chose, could cut your access to your colonies and conquer them at will. And you look at, how they all the European countries painted all these countries purple or pink or whatever their favorite imperial color was on the map. But, did the fact that Belgium owned the Congo change the world balance of power? Was that a strategic thing? I mean, it's important for the Congolese and actually not a very good thing for them. And it kind of made the people in Belgium feel like really good. Look at how much of the world we've got. But did it really change anything? Similarly, the Dutch Empire in the East Indies, what did that matter? Beyond, again, obviously some important local issues. But instead, it seems to me that this vision of world history, it's like a production of Snow White that has just 7 dwarfs in it. There's no woman in that house with the 7 dwarfs. Or it's like a production of Hamlet that doesn't have a Prince of Denmark in it. That is to say, when I look at history, and more I feel this way, what the big story of the last 300 to 400 years is the rise of a global system of power, trade, finance, politics, culture, and ideology that rested once on the power of Great Britain and today rests largely on the power of the United States. And if you look at this system, it was stronger, more highly developed, more deeply implanted in the year 2000 than it was in 1900. In 1900, it was stronger, wider, more deeply implanted, more highly developed than it was in 1800. And in 1800, it was stronger, wider, blah, 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 than it was in 1700. Now, to me, this almost looks like a trend. It almost looks like a phenomenon that's worth studying, and yet nobody's paid a lot of attention to it. Now, I think this is partly because we Americans think it might be bad luck to think about it too much. It might, make the evil eye jealous if we talk about it too much, and it seems like bad manners. It's triumphalist. I get that a lot. People say, "You're triumphalist." I say, "No, I'm trying to describe what's actually happened in history." And I can't help it. If since 1688, when you look at this, since 1688, either Britain or the United States or both together have been on the winning side in every major great power conflict in which they've participated. That is, small wars. The British got beat by the Mahdi in the Sudan. The Americans didn't do that gloriously in Vietnam. But if you look at the big wars, the wars that kind of arrange the pecking order of great powers and lay the foundations of the international system from generation to generation, the British and the Americans have been winning these since the reign of William III. 1688 in Britain. Again, this almost looks like a trend. By the way, the British did lose one of these wars, and that was the War of the American Revolution. But that's it. That's it. And so the fact that over 300 years, the world system has been shaped by these conflicts in which either the British or the Americans have been victorious, from the war of, King William's War, the War of the League of Augsburg, through the Cold War. Again, that looks almost like a trend. It looks almost like something worth thinking about and discussing. But we don't do it because we don't want anybody to think we are triumphalist. Now, to say that we've been winning these wars and leading the development of the international system doesn't mean we've always been doing it in the right way, or that we have been, the moral paragons of the universe, or that we've used our power wisely or well. I'm not making those claims necessarily. That's a different discussion. But I think it's very important to have frank, clear thinking and talking about the foundations of world power in the world system, as I say, that is today stronger, more widely extended, and more highly developed than it's ever been in its history. I don't know whether in 2100 we'll say it's stronger than it was in 2000. The future is an open book, and as they say among mutual funds, past performance is no guarantee of future success. Those are different questions. But in trying to understand world history and in trying to understand where the world is today, it seems to me this is the foundation. So having struggled to this conclusion, I then began to ask myself, why? Why have the English-speaking countries developed these two global hegemonies, one after the other? And I think I've found some answers. And that's what a lot of God and Gold is about. The secret Anglo-American plan for global domination. And I guess I'm looking around the crowd, it looks to me like you can be trusted with this information. Please don't repeat it to any suspicious persons. But I have a chapter in the book where I talk about the protocols of the elders of Greenwich. Those guys who are looking to the elders of Zion are just missing it. That's not who's been running the world. And I think we do, in fact, have a five-point plan, five-point strategy for global dominion. The neat thing about this strategy is it works even if you don't know about it. And certainly many of our presidents perhaps have not fully understood all the details of the plan. And what I thought I would do in the limited time that we have this morning is I'll just go quickly through the 5 points of the plan, and then we can open it for discussion. The first thing I should say about the plan is, of course, not only did we not invent it, we stole it from the English, but the English didn't invent it either. They stole it from the Dutch. You could say that the operating software on which the global system still runs today, version 1.0, was introduced by the Dutch sometime soon after the year 1600. The British came along with version 2.0 about 1700. And then sometime around 1945, the Americans came in with version 3.0. But they're all related. My British friends, by the way, will tell me that version 3.0 is still in beta testing and has a number of flaws. The Dutch, I think, still think that version 2.0 didn't work out everything. And so what is this 5-point system? What are the basic elements of the operating software on which the global system has been running for so long? Point 1 has nothing to do with foreign policy, but it determines most of what happens afterwards. That is this: you have an open society at home. The Dutch managed this very well in the 17th century. All over Europe, you have wars of religion, you have persecution. What do the Dutch do? They say, well, you know what? We're going to basically be Calvinist here. But, you Lutherans, you're all going to hell, but you can still, worship, okay? We're not going to, get in your face. Catholics, you're going to even deeper pit. But as long as you're discreet, you can have your little quiet chapels. And furthermore, you can make money. You can do business. And then they noticed there were a lot of Jews fleeing persecution in Spain and Portugal and all their empires. The Dutch said, come on in. The Dutch were running what's now New York. It was then New Amsterdam. A group of Jewish refugees arrived in New Amsterdam. The very religious Dutch governor, Peter Stuyvesant, wanted to kick them out. Well, the Dutch West India Company, which was running New Amsterdam, sent him a very tough note saying, look, this colony is supposed to make money, and you cannot make money unless you have people living in it. You are not going to be turning away settlers just because you happen not to agree with their religious views. And from that day to this, that's been the philosophy of New York. So, I guess the only people New York really doesn't much like today are people with religious views, but that's a different story. So what you have is you have all of these people, plus it was open in other ways. If you were a poor peasant but you were smart and clever and cunning and lucky and maybe like married the boss's daughter or something, but you could rise, you could become a wealthy merchant. You didn't have to do what your parents had done. If you were a scientist or a university professor and you came up with an idea that was new and that challenged the existing wisdom, the Inquisition didn't come knocking at your door with some torches and sticks. Okay? You could publish it. If you were a merchant and you figured out some new way of making money, no one would stop you. You could try it. You could give it a try. And so we saw an amazing flourishing of the arts, of the sciences, of finance, industry in Holland at this time. Holland is about the size of of Maryland. In the 17th century, it's something like 10,000 ships engaged in international commerce. Scholars like René Descartes came in order to publish freely. After a few years of Dutch food, he went home to Paris, but, that's understandable. Still, he came. They invented, if you think about the foundations of the modern world, in many cases the financial innovations on which we still depend today came. Long-distance ship insurance, that made it more practical to have voyages to the East Indies and make money from them by laying off the risk. The stock market, the joint stock company, develops in the Netherlands at this time. The system of national financing that is at the basis of every central bank and national treasury today comes out of there. The British called it Dutch financing when they set up the Bank of England. And Alexander Hamilton, Bank of the United States, was trying to transfer that Anglo-Dutch financial system to the U.S. Every central bank in the world today, except maybe in Zimbabwe, runs its affairs more or less the way the Dutch developed for funding a permanent national debt back in those days. So, that's point one, an open society. Point two, take the show on the road, engage. This open society means you have new products, new techniques, competently run companies because talent is rising, not just the brother-in-law or the inbred aristocrats. So you go out all over the world, you buy, you sell, you listen to what other people have to say, you learn, you get new ideas. You find out that pepper is very cheap in Java but incredibly expensive in Norway. Lights go on, ding, 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 ding. You begin to understand the world as an economic unit and a system. And you make money. Hand over fist, you make money. Sometime when you're in a museum that has a lot of Golden Age Dutch paintings, go look at some of those paintings and don't look at the brush strokes and the artistic composition. I mean, they're great, look at that if you want to, blah, blah, blah. But no, go look at just how rich all those people are in those paintings. How much stuff they've got. Elaborate instruments, watches, things from all over the world. And remember that up until then, portraits had only been painted of the very high nobility and royal families. And suddenly you have very ordinary, unusually successful, but still just merchants having this kind of wealth and power. All right? So that's point two. Engage with the world, and that will make you rich. Point three, using this wealth, you have a geopolitical strategy which secures your economic interests so that your wealth makes you rich enough to have this strategy, to fund the strategy, and then the strategy protects your wealth. So it kind of keeps feeding itself. And what are the elements of this strategy? Admiral Mahan wrote about the importance of sea power and it is a maritime commercial strategy. You have navies, which tend to be cheaper than large armies, by the way, and you protect your commerce and the chief sea lanes of the world. So that where your merchants go, boom, your navy can protect them from pirates and blah, 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 all the things. But, this obviously reinforces your wealth, but also you think of the world as a system. Even today, most countries around the world think about foreign policy in terms of what's really important to you is your neighbors. And then you have like the next concentric circle of less close and therefore less interesting all the way out to the far fringes. In America, that's not true. It wasn't true in Britain either, or even in the Netherlands. But in the 18th century, you already find a British prime minister writing, "Ministers in this country whose interests extend to all the earth must consider the whole globe when making policy." So what you do is you have this vision of the world. The world is a system, and the goal of your foreign policy is to have favorable global conditions for your international strategy of trade and engagement. And you think of each of the important areas of the world as a theater in this world system. And the goal of your foreign policy is to have a situation in each of these theaters that furthers your global ambition. And normally that means you're looking for a balance of power in a key theater. So like the British are always trying to keep the French and then the Germans from taking over the rest of Europe. Or we sided with the Asian countries against Britain in the early 19th century to prevent Britain from colonizing them. Then we sided with China against Japan. Then it was everybody against the Soviets. Balance of power in chief geopolitical theaters. This system tends to work really well. Okay? And again, for more than 300 years, the people following this path have been winning wars with people who've tried alternative strategies. So there may just possibly be something in it. 4, now that you've built a global system of trade and so on, you might think the thing to do would be to lock everybody else out of it, the way the Spaniards and the Portuguese tried to lock everybody else out of their empires. But surprisingly, that's not what we've been doing. Think of the British in the 19th century opening up with free trade. Even if other countries had tariffs against British goods, the British admitted their goods. You're basically encouraging other countries to participate in this global system that you've built. Think of what we did with Germany and Japan after World War II. We didn't say, okay, you're in the penalty box now, and you're going to be discriminated against, and you can't get things. It's no. You can buy as much tin from Bolivia and copper from Chile, oil from the Middle East as much as you want. We'll police the sea routes so it'll get there safely. You don't have to worry about that. You'll get it. Take your yen, your Deutschmarks, wherever you want, buy whatever you want, make whatever you want, and then you can sell whatever you want, even in the U.S., and we won't stop you. You can sell us Volkswagens and Toyotas till there's not a GM car left in America. And we'll grumble and complain, but basically it's okay. You can do it. And you can obviously see we're doing that with China and India today. Get rich. Again, the idea here is that if other countries are getting rich in your system and powerful and respected and prestigious, they're not going to think they have to go to war with you. They're going to accept your system. And since your goal is to maintain this system, that's like game, set, and match. You don't have to fight for it because they like it. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. However, that's 4A. Every now and then, people are misguided. And even though the system is making them rich, even though it's giving them a lot of opportunity, they decide they want to turn it over and set up their own version, like Kaiser Wilhelm did in 1914, or like Hitler and Tojo did 30 years later, and his own